What would you do if, in the middle of the night, you saw a girl in a nightgown inside your house, calling your husband by an intimate name you've never heard before? Hello, I'm Lauren. I just got back from a work party filled with fake handshakes and forced smiles. The bedroom light upstairs was still on, even though it was nearly midnight. Thomas and I have been married for 3 years, and in all that time, he's never once stepped foot in the kitchen. The housekeeper had left hours ago. My footsteps hesitated slightly, then moved toward the kitchen, where warm golden light spilled from the half-closed door. When I stepped inside, the girl didn't surprise me as much as I thought she would. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with a natural kind of beauty that made it hard to look away. Her long hair fell loosely around her shoulders, her cheeks flushed pink from the heat of the stove. She was wearing an oversized nightgown that reached her ankles. A loosely tied linen apron hung around her waist. She was stirring a cup of honey lemon water, the sweet scent filling the entire room. I stood there quietly, watching, feeling like I was witnessing a play in which I hadn't been cast. She must have heard the sound of footsteps, because she smiled, her voice soft, but filled with a kind of intimacy. "Tom, can you help me tie the apron?" I didn't say anything. I just walked up, lifted the loose straps of the apron, and tied them into a perfect bow. My movements were slow, almost ceremonial. She turned around, still beaming, as if expecting praise from the man she had just called Tom. "Didn't I tell you to go get some rest?" Her sentence broke off, stuck in her throat. The porcelain spoon in her hand slipped and shattered on the marble floor, shards scattering near my bare feet. Her face went pale as she stammered, realizing who I was. "Lauren." "Mr. Steele." I didn't respond right away. I just silently looked down at her neck and shoulders. Red marks were scattered across her skin. Unmistakable evidence of a fun night my husband had clearly enjoyed. They spoke louder than any lie he could come up with. I smiled calmly and asked, "Honey lemon water? Mind sharing some with me?" I don't quite remember when the marriage between Thomas and me began to rot. Maybe it was those late nights he came home with traces of unfamiliar perfume lingering on his shirt, or the secret messages he'd quickly delete whenever I walked into the room. What I do remember clearly is the first woman who came to me. It was his former secretary, a sleek blonde with eyes full of ambition. She came like a sudden storm, catching me completely off guard. The moment I opened the door, I saw them tangled up on the brown leather sofa Thomas and I had picked out together at a high-end furniture store. Thomas was lying on his back, eyes half closed, breathing heavy from alcohol, while she was on top, hair messy, dress askew. Only when I stepped in did she pretend to be startled, eyes wide like she'd just been electrocuted, scrambling to slide her dress down over her thighs. Her acting was so terrible that if she auditioned for a cheap soap opera, she'd be cut in the first round. I stood there, keys still in hand, as a heavy silence hung in the air. I knew Thomas was too drunk to register anything. His face flushed from the French wine he'd had at the company party. I also knew she was taking a gamble, hoping to replace me maybe, to become the second Mrs. Carter with a bank account to match. So when she got fired within 48 hours, I wasn't the least bit surprised. Thomas had always been efficient at cleaning up the messes he made, like a seasoned businessman sweeping trash off his desk. But back to the moment in the kitchen, I've always had a good memory. The girl standing across from me was instantly recognizable as Bianca Lane, the same woman I'd seen 4 months ago. That day, I had driven to Thomas's office under a downpour. From the parking lot, I quietly watched him holding her around the waist, the chauffeur carefully shielding them with an umbrella. He opened the car door and gently placed her in the passenger seat, like she was some fragile porcelain doll. It was a picture-perfect moment. Rain falling softly, a handsome man protecting a delicate girl, straight out of some Korean drama. I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, thinking, is she the next one? Or just one of many? I took a sip of the honey lemon water she had just made. The sweet and sour taste spread across my tongue, offering a fleeting warmth in the cold air of the kitchen. I casually looked at her, standing by the dining table. Bianca's eyes were downcast, hands clenched tightly together, fingertips pale from tension. Her face was drained of color, lips pressed together, eyes shimmering with tears that hadn't dared fall. I spoke, dismissing her with the same tone one might use to talk about the weather. It's getting late. She jolted like a frightened rabbit in the woods, quickly looking up, wide-eyed. I'll go now, Lauren. Her voice trembled, the picture of a polite, perceptive girl who knew how to read a room. No wonder Thomas kept her around for so long. She didn't ask to go upstairs to see him again, didn't bother changing out of her oversized nightgown that still hung awkwardly around her legs. She quietly picked up her phone from the kitchen counter and walked to the door, her footsteps light, like she didn't want to wake anyone. Halfway there, she turned back and spoke softly. Lauren. I looked at her. The honey lemon water. Could you remind Tom to drink it? If not, he'll have a headache in the morning again. I nodded, a faint smile passing over my lips without ever reaching my eyes. The moment the door clicked shut, silence fell over the house so completely I could hear my own heartbeat. Then the bedroom door opened, and Thomas slowly emerged. His sleepwear hung loose, more than half the buttons undone, revealing the toned lines of his chest. I gave him a brief glance, then looked away indifferently, focusing on the unfinished glass of honey lemon water. He grunted softly, one hand resting on the stair rail as he made his way down. It had been a long time since Thomas and I had any intimacy. Hugs, kisses, all of it faded into distant memory. He'd never lacked beautiful women around him. Even if they were lined up, I probably wouldn't even get a spot. Our marriage was hanging by a thread, fragile enough to snap at any moment. Lauren, he said gently, in that honeyed tone he used to charm investors or seduce women. I met his gaze and saw only a smirk on his lips, mocking and curled with sarcasm. Maybe you should give it a try too. Young ones. They're different, you know. His words hovered in the air, like a challenge or an invitation, thick with irony. I stood there, and suddenly, the glass of lemon water in my hand tasted bitter. Looking at Thomas's face, calm and untouched by emotion, I suddenly remembered the day we got married. Everyone around us had smiled and raised their glasses, wishing us eternal happiness. But in the dressing room, when my best friend helped adjust the train of my white gown, her face didn't show joy or sadness, just a strange silence, like she saw a future I couldn't yet imagine. As the wedding planner called me into the hall, she reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. She whispered, Lauren, so softly I almost didn't catch it. Welcome to the swamp. My marriage with Thomas was more of an unspoken deal. We both knew love wasn't the glue holding us together. Outwardly, we were the perfect couple. Him, the successful businessman with a charming smile. Me, the sharp, well-dressed wife, who always showed up in designer suits and confident grins. Strangers admired us, said we were the ideal, the picture-perfect marriage framed behind glass. But no one ever asked what materials we used to build that glossy shell. Cheap lies, willful ignorance, and silence so heavy it bruised the soul. In a world ruled by wealth and power, true affection among the successful is a rare gem. He built his empire with handshakes, million-dollar contracts, and women eager to throw themselves at him for a ticket to the high life. But what truly stunned me was that the one who suggested I cheat was my own husband. His words, maybe you should try it too. Young ones are different, after all, kept echoing in my head like a blade wrapped in silk. I placed the glass on the counter, the clink of glass on stone echoing sharply in the quiet room. Thomas stayed where he was, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning me like I was a rival in a boardroom, not the wife he once vowed to cherish forever. The phone on the table buzzed once, cutting through my train of thought. I glanced down. The screen lit up with the name Charles Hay. A young man, as Thomas would say. A short message. I glanced over at Thomas, now sitting in the chair across from me. I stood up, dabbed my lips with a napkin, and said calmly but coldly, "I've got something to take care of. I'll be out for a bit." He barely responded with a dull, "Yeah," like he couldn't care less where I was going or what I was doing. It was late at night, the streets mostly empty, just flickers of neon lights from tall buildings blinking through the dark. I drove straight to the address Charles had sent. The bar was still brightly lit, with a row of sleek luxury cars parked out front. 4 or 5 guys huddled together near the door, laughing loudly, probably talking about a game or some girl. Just a glance, and I spotted Charles standing under the streetlight. Tall, broad shoulders, slim waist, a body that stood out like a sculpture carved under cold white light. The glow cast a slight blur over his face, but the kind of beauty he had made it hard to look away, the kind that made people want to stop and stare a little longer. I pulled over, stepped out of the car, and called out, "Charles," my voice just loud enough to slice through the pulsing music from the bar. He looked up, a smile just starting to form, when a figure suddenly darted out from behind and blocked our view. A girl, platinum blonde, tight dress, breath reeking of alcohol so strong I instinctively furrowed my brow. She shoved my shoulder, not hard but clumsy and full of attitude, and snapped, sharp and unfiltered, "Hey, where the hell did you come from? At your age and still chasing after kids?" I nearly laughed. I'm 25, not old, but years of clawing through the cutthroat world of power and privilege had given me a sharp edge that set me apart from the wide-eyed college girls who'd never tasted reality. She scanned me from head to toe, the fitted black blazer, the standout red Louboutins, then scoffed, "Don't tell me you think Charles would actually like a cougar like you?" I raised an eyebrow, about to respond, but Charles stepped in like a gust of wind, grabbed her wrist firmly. His eyes were ice-cold, voice low and razor-sharp, cutting through the night. "She's a former classmate of mine, Claire." The girl, Claire, froze, her drunkenness sobering just enough from the grip on her wrist. "Charles," she stammered, voice shaking. "I'm sorry, I didn't." Charles let go, but his stare didn't waver, like he was looking at a stranger. "My friends aren't your business, Claire. We're not that close." He paused, then added, voice calm but dripping with sarcasm, "Sounds like you still need a manners lesson." Claire's face drained of color, eyes shimmering like she'd just taken a blow straight to the soft heart of a fragile young girl. I stood there, arms crossed, and I could practically hear her heart cracking. Pathetic. But right then, when Charles turned back to me, the soft smile returned to his face. I'd met Charles at a bar, too, a few months back, on a night when my world felt like it was crumbling under the weight of Thomas's latest affair scandals. For the first time, his flings weren't just elite gossip. They had real consequences. Company stock dropped sharply, and I, as head of communications, was stuck cleaning up the PR disaster for my own husband. Tired and worn out, I ducked into a bar, hoping the dim lights and thumping bass would drown out my thoughts. The bar buzzed, clinking glasses, noisy laughter. The bartender, a cheeky young guy, slid me a martini and teased, "Who knows? Maybe tonight a prince will fall from the sky and save you from your troubles." I smirked without answering, took a sip, letting the bitterness spread on my tongue. I got up to go to the restroom. I needed a breath, an escape from the air thick with pretense. As I stepped out, the narrow hallway back to the bar was blocked by a dramatic confession scene. Amid the music, a girl stood at the corner, red-faced, shouting with all her courage, "I really like you. Can I be your girlfriend?" Her voice trembled like she'd poured her whole heart into the question. The guy responded, something low and muffled by the music, and I edged closer to eavesdrop. But all I saw was the girl looking down, tears streaming, and then she ran past me, leaving behind a trail of sweet perfume mixed with alcohol. When the guy turned around, I saw his face clearly. Charles Hay, the heir to the Hayes business empire, born with a silver spoon, chiseled features, and eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. I knew him, not just from business articles, but from whispered stories among the elite about this young but powerful man. My instincts as a businesswoman kicked in like a predator catching scent. I stepped forward and gently tapped his shoulder. "Charles." He turned, squinting slightly, as if trying to place me. I smiled, voice calm but sure. "I'm not like other women." "I'm married." He flinched, his whole body reacting. A prince on a white horse doesn't only rescue Cinderellas. He can also mend the broken heart of a married woman. After all, if I could build ties with the Hayes family, $1 billion deal would be child's play. Winning over a crown prince like Charles was a hell of a lot easier than battling those conniving old wolves in boardrooms. Years after graduating, I shamelessly used my old professor's connections, playing the alumni card to get close to Charles, taking care of him like a sister, a friend. Back in the day, charming women had been my specialty. Big sisters, little sisters, aunts, female teachers. Soft-hearted women always melted under sincerity and tact. But Charles was different. He was a fortress. Nothing got through. He deflected my every flirtation with surgical precision, then bound all my attention in the neat label of schoolmate. Just like today, I came to pick up a drunk man from a bar, all under the excuse of checking on an old classmate. When I started the car, Charles was already in the passenger seat, head tilted against the window, eyes half closed, like he was fighting the urge to pass out. "Sorry to trouble you, today Before he could finish, I leaned over, pulled the seatbelt strap, and clicked it in for him. I felt his breath catch, his breathing suddenly quicken. The scent of liquor on him blended with that woody cologne of his, forming something oddly alluring and dangerous. As I looked up, our eyes locked, and our noses nearly touched in the cramped space of the car. I smirked, teasing, "Why'd you stop talking?" Charles nearly jumped like a startled ragdoll cat in winter, hands shooting out to push me back. "Too close!" His ears flushed bright red, eyes sparkling under the streetlight spilling through the window. "Lauren, can you talk like a normal person?" His voice was flustered and annoyed, but the way he tried to stay serious made me want to laugh. I leaned back in the driver's seat, hand on the wheel, my tone half joking, half serious. "You stood up for an old lady like me, and I have nothing to repay you with. Guess I'll just have to offer myself in return." "Lauren Steele!" Charles practically yelled. His fur puffed up all over again, his face as red as a ripe apple. I smiled coolly. "Yes, young master." "Got something to say?" He frowned, silent, lips pressed tight, like he was holding back a storm. I knew he wasn't happy, but his silence made the air in the car even heavier. A long while passed, as the streetlights swept across his sharp profile, and I finally heard him mutter, voice hoarse but clear, "You're not old." I raised an eyebrow, glanced at him. "So do I still need to repay you with my body?" Charles didn't answer right away, just leaned his head on his hand, eyes half closed, his gaze drifting down to my hand on the steering wheel. The wedding ring on my fourth finger glinted under the light, like a reminder of the swamp I was still stuck in. Thomas's ring had vanished long ago, probably tossed somewhere along with his wedding vows. But I still wore mine, like a misfit in high society where love and loyalty seemed to have nothing to do with marriage. People used to mock that Thomas must be whipped just because I still wore that ring. But I never made a scene, never publicly confronted the mistresses he brought home. Later, they envied me, saying Thomas was lucky to marry a woman who loved him enough to forgive every affair. Loved him deeply, huh? I often wondered. Maybe I was just crafting a fairy tale romance for myself. When the traffic light turned from yellow to green, Charles spoke, calm but cutting, like a clean slice. "I don't get involved with married women." The next day, I saw Catherine Reed at an art auction, where crystal chandeliers cast glittering light over carefully made-up faces and polite smiles that masked countless hidden agendas. Catherine, with her platinum curls and bold red lips, glanced at the dark circles under my eyes and fired a jab without a shred of restraint. Finally decided to find someone? Take care of yourself, Lauren. I gave a faint smirk, responding evenly. No, just went out at midnight to play chauffeur for someone. Catherine looked me over from head to toe, from the deep blue fitted dress to the metallic heels, then squinted, her eyes narrowing like she was sizing up a rival. Why do I get the feeling Charles is quite the player too? I neither confirmed nor denied, just gave a casual shrug and left behind a vague smile that forced her to guess for herself. I was here today for an abstract painting being auctioned, a piece I knew for sure would impress Mrs. Hayes, Charles's mother. As a businesswoman, I understood the power of catering to someone's taste. If I could win that painting, I could bring it to the Hayes estate tomorrow, a strategic step forward in building ties with their empire. Everything was calculated, and I wasn't playing this game to lose. The auction staff brought out the final item. The painting was stunning, swirls of cobalt blue and golden yellow melting into one another, glowing under the lights like it was whispering a silent story meant to hypnotize. I ignored the auctioneer's drawn-out introduction, focusing only on the starting bid. The moment he announced it, I raised my paddle, voice firm. 3 million. 3.2. Another voice rang out, swift like a blade. The numbers climbed steadily, tension thickening in the room. 3.5, I countered, my eyes locked coldly on the painting. 3.8, I continued, my hand steady, even as I felt the weight of competition tightening. No one else raised their paddle, and the auctioneer began the count. 3.8 going once. 3.8 going twice. 4 million! A voice rang out unexpectedly. Instinctively, I turned, and my heart skipped a beat. Thomas was seated there, auction paddle still raised, one arm draped around the woman beside him, Bianca Lane. He looked at me, lips curled in a knowing smirk, those seductive eyes glittering with amusement. Bianca, catching my gaze, flinched and pressed herself deeper into his chest, like a frightened bird seeking shelter. I drew my eyes back, took a deep breath to steady myself, then raised my paddle. 4.2. Thomas immediately fired back. 4.3. I gritted my teeth, voice hardening. 4.4. He didn't stop, voice calm but laced with challenge. 4.5. Each number he threw out felt like a blow, intended, deliberate, dragging me into his game. The room went quiet, eyes darting back and forth between us, like watching a play about a broken marriage unfold in real time. A dull ache throbbed at my temple as I stood up, walking toward him, heels tapping against the polished wood floor. I recall you're not much of an art collector, I said, voice cold as ice, eyes locked on him. Thomas gave a lazy smile, that same smug grin unshaken. Just thought the painting would suit Bianca. He tilted his head toward her, eyes dripping with exaggerated affection. I turned my gaze to Bianca. She bit her lower lip, eyes red and watery, as if holding back tears. Lauren, Ms. Steele, the painting. It's beautiful, she murmured, voice trembling like a child caught doing something wrong. I looked away, the composure I'd carefully maintained all this time nearly cracking. Thomas loved watching women fight, especially loved watching me lose control. The women around him were never in short supply, each with their own tactics, their own provocations, and he relished every second of the game. I'd only lost my temper once, 2 years ago, when I slapped a woman across the face. I can't even remember what she looked like now. All I remember is the sting in my palm afterward and the smile on Thomas's face. Radiant, like my rage was the best gift he'd ever received. He took my hand then, gently stroking it, his voice tender but laced with mockery. Lauren! If she upset you, you could have just told me. No need to get your hands dirty. I didn't continue bidding, just quietly stood up and walked out of the auction hall. Inside, the sound of the auctioneer's gavel rang out dry and final, sealing the painting's new owner. I paused by the door, letting my eyes scan the scene. Thomas and Bianca were being guided by staff toward the payment counter. Thomas pulled his credit card from his leather wallet with slow, confident movements, like he was flaunting a victory. Bianca stood beside him, eyes flickering with worry, yet still clinging tightly to his hand. In that moment, a strange sense of relief quietly rose within me. I lowered my gaze, opened my phone, and sent a message to the contact saved as, "Love Charles. Where are you?" The screen lit up almost instantly with a reply. Lab. I glanced at the clock, exactly 10 p.m., then typed, "Haven't had dinner again, have you?" The chat showed typing for a long time, like Charles was struggling to come up with an answer. But in the end, no message came through. I smiled and typed, "Joe's Diner, wait for me. I'll be at the campus gate in about 40 minutes. As I slipped my phone away, I caught Catherine's gaze. She was nearby with a glass of red wine in hand. She watched me, her red lips curled into a mischievous smile. "Driving the little heir around again tonight?" I gave a small nod without saying much. Catherine looked like she wanted to say something, then held back, raising her brows as if to speak without words. I smiled, my tone gentle but full of meaning. "Catherine, I'm a businesswoman." She laughed, shaking her head like she'd just unlocked a secret I didn't need to explain. I timed everything down to the second. When I arrived at the campus gate, Charles was already there, standing tall and neat like a soldier on duty. Under the street lamp, his slender figure stood out, but the slight hunch of his shoulders and his absent-minded gaze gave off an adorably foolish vibe. I stopped the car, rolled down the window, and handed him the takeout bag from Joe's Diner off the passenger seat. Charles took it gently and murmured, "Thank you." His voice was deep, tinged with shyness, like a schoolboy caught doing something awkward. I looked up, about to tease him, but my eyes wandered off and landed on two familiar figures under the streetlight. The world really is small. Thomas stood with his back to us, but Bianca was clear as day, the abstract painting they had just won glowing in her arms like a gemstone under the light. At 20, she was radiant like a blooming flower, needing no embellishment to leave people stunned by her pure, magnetic beauty. "She's beautiful," I said, then turned my gaze back to Charles, a sly smile playing on my lips. "My husband has a thing for girls like her." The words had barely left my mouth when Charles spun his head toward me, his brow twitching in surprise. "That's not my type," he said almost instantly, so firmly it caught me off guard for a second or two before I burst out laughing, my laughter echoing in the quiet night. Charles's face flushed crimson, ears turning red. He looked like a strawberry mochi, soft and begging to be poked a little more. "Then what is your type?" I asked, eyes gleaming with curiosity. Charles took a deep breath, ears still red, and dropped his arms to look at me. "What do you mean, your husband likes that type?" His question caught me. Defining my type wasn't simple, but one thing was clear. Bianca and I were from two different worlds. She, a dazzling flower of youth. I, a woman worn down by calculations and corporate warfare. I didn't answer. Just smiled and waved my hand. "Let's go eat." "It's late," Charles frowned, clearly unsatisfied, but said nothing more. After a while, he sighed, his voice low. "Are you free next Friday?" I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Why?" "Charles, are you taking your first step into forbidden love?" "Lauren Steele!" He snapped through gritted teeth, ears flaring red again, voice annoyed yet sheepish. "I just want to treat you to dinner, to thank you for everything." "Just the two of us?" I teased, leaning in and poking his cheek on purpose, my finger brushing against the small, adorable dimple. Charles flinched, recoiling like he'd been burned, stumbling like a kid caught stealing cookies. "Forget it if you're not free," he mumbled, turning away, voice full of frustrated embarrassment. I laughed aloud. "Of course I'm free." Friday it is. Charles didn't respond, just clutched the takeout bag tighter, his eyes avoiding mine. but the corners of his lips quietly curved upward. I knew Bianca would come find me. I just didn't expect her to act so quickly. When her message popped up on my phone screen, I was sitting in the office, flipping through a thick stack of documents, the glow from the computer screen casting tired shadows on my face. I glanced at the message, then pushed the folder toward my assistant Kyle, saying calmly, "I'll be back in about 30 minutes. You lead the first 5 minutes of the meeting for me." Kyle nodded, the eyes behind his glasses betraying no curiosity, like he was already used to my sudden departures. I went downstairs and drove to the cafe Bianca had chosen, located right near Thomas's company. The air inside carried a faint scent of roasted coffee, and warm yellow lights lit up the small wooden tables. The moment I stepped in, Bianca stood up immediately, her white dress swaying lightly, her face glowing under the soft light. "Lauren." I nodded and sat across from her. She smiled, her pale pink lips curling gently, her voice soft. "I remember you don't like coffee, so I ordered fruit tea for you." "Is that okay?" I gave a small nod, lifted the cup, and the subtle scent of orange and lemon made me relax just a little. "You said you had something you wanted to talk to me about." "What is it?" I asked. My eyes locked on her, showing no emotion. Bianca looked at me, her large brown eyes slowly turning red, like she was trying to suppress a wave of emotion. She lowered her head, one slender hand gently touching her still flat belly, her voice trembling. "Lauren, I'm pregnant." The air felt frozen. She continued, her voice choked. "I grew up without a father, raised in a single-parent family. I know how much harder it is for a child who doesn't have a dad." She looked up, eyes shimmering with tears. "Lauren, I just hope my baby can have a complete family." I took a sip of the fruit tea, the sweet and sour taste spreading across my tongue, but it did nothing to soothe the storm brewing inside me. "I remember Thomas was always very careful with contraception," I said coldly, my eyes fixed on her. Bianca's tears dropped onto the wooden table, each one sparkling like tiny broken stars. She looked up, eyes glistening, the kind of fragile beauty that would make anyone's heart ache. "It was me. I didn't take the pill that day." Her voice cracked, as if confessing the biggest sin of her life. "It's my fault. I just loved him too much, Lauren. He's the only man I've ever loved." I looked at her, feeling like I was watching a performance that had gone way over the top. Thomas was stupid, and his mistresses were no smarter. I'd thought for a moment Bianca might be somewhat interesting. Turns out she was just another lovesick fool. I watched her cry with indifference, then glanced down at my watch and realized this conversation could end sooner than I'd planned. "Bianca!" I called, my voice calm but sharp like a blade. She froze, eyes red, looking at me like a lost rabbit. "Do you know why I agreed to meet you today?" I asked, my gaze steady. Bianca looked startled, her lips parted, but no words came out. I went on. "My time is valuable." I normally wouldn't bother with Thomas's emotional debts. Plenty of women have messaged me, but I treat those texts as spam and delete them. I leaned in slightly, voice lowering. "But you're different. You're very beautiful." That rare compliment from me made Bianca blink in disbelief, as if she couldn't trust her own ears. The truth is, she was beautiful enough for me to willingly spend half an hour sitting here just to admire her, a refined little pleasure in the middle of my scheming days. I pulled a tissue from the box on the table, stood up, and gently dabbed the tear still clinging to the corner of her eye. My movement was slow, almost tender, but my eyes were ice cold. "Do me a favor. Use that face of yours to help me and Thomas get divorced. Can you do that?" Bianca froze, her lips quivering, as if my words had shattered every illusion she'd ever had. I gave a faint smile, stood up straight, leaving the untouched cup of fruit tea on the table. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked out of the cafe, the little chime of the door ringing like a closing statement. Under the soft afternoon sunlight, I knew I had just planted a seed. Not for revenge, but to cut the last string tying me down to the swamp named Thomas. The day Charles came to pick me up, he drove himself. A sleek black Aston Martin glided to a stop in front of my office. I stood outside, my eyes drifting over the smooth frame of the car, and couldn't help blurting out, "I'm seriously risking it messing around with guys like you." Every day, I grind through the corporate battlefield, calculating every move, yet I still couldn't compare to a trust fund prince born with a silver spoon and everything handed to him. Charles chuckled, his deep voice floating through the late afternoon air. "And you think you're not the same?" I hesitated, glanced at the passenger seat, then looked at him. "Can I sit in the front?" "Sitting in the back makes it seem like you're my chauffeur," Charles shrugged with a soft smile. "Sit in the front." I got in. The scent of premium leather mixed with the faint water-based cologne he wore created a strangely comforting atmosphere. On the road, I broke the silence first, my tone casual. I once heard someone say, in the end, everyone becomes the kind of person they hate the most. Charles kept his eyes on the road, replying calmly, "So what kind of person do you hate?" I gave a soft laugh. "The rich." He glanced at me, something flickering behind his eyes, but didn't say more. The restaurant Charles had reserved was on a high floor, with large windows overlooking a city glowing with lights. The mood was warm, the soft clink of cutlery blending with mellow jazz. We sat by the window, chatting about light topics, not too deep, but enough to fill the space. Halfway through the meal, a server wheeled over a small cart, carrying a petite birthday cake topped with smooth white frosting and bright red strawberries. I looked up, surprised, and met Charles's gaze. He smiled gently, voice low. "Happy birthday!" "I didn't know what to get you, so I figured I'd just treat you to dinner," I smiled back, a quiet warmth creeping in, even though I knew full well that no one in this world is ever truly innocent. Charles, the heir to the Hayes Empire, certainly wasn't free of calculation. He must have seen through my murky intentions, the way I tactfully approached him, using the pretense of being an old schoolmate to close the distance. Vague affection is the fastest shortcut between two strangers, but Charles always stopped at the line, never crossing, never retreating. This gift, a meal instead of a lasting object, was his way of placing our relationship somewhere safe. Not too close, not too far. I took a bite of the cake, the sweet cream melting on my tongue, but before I could say anything, the lights in the restaurant began to flicker. The piano melody shifted to something romantic and tender. A group of servers appeared carrying a huge bouquet and pushed an enormous cake to the table next to ours. On top, two small, intricately made figurines, a couple holding hands. The lead server smiled and announced, "Happy anniversary!" "Wishing you a lifetime of happiness," applause erupted, and suddenly the room was lit with joy and spectacle. I rested my chin on my hand, watching the scene, and sighed softly. They look really happy. Charles glanced at the table beside us, his expression briefly conflicted, then mumbled, like searching for the right words. "Your husband. Maybe. He's at home right now, planning something like this for you too." I smiled and looked straight into his eyes, a gaze full of unspoken meaning. Charles met my look, fell silent, then lowered his eyes as if trying to escape it. "You're really not curious about me at all, are you?" I teased, my voice light but laced with provocation. I tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet my gaze, then nodded toward the happy couple. "Hey, my husband's right there." Charles turned his head, and his eyes immediately landed on Bianca, radiant in a red dress, snuggled up next to Thomas, who was holding her waist in a display of open affection. Charles nearly knocked over his wineglass as he jumped up, a flicker of anger crossing his face. I reached out and gently grabbed his wrist, soft but firm enough to hold him back. He froze, looked down at me, and the amused glint in my eyes softened the fury on his face. For the first time, he didn't pull away like I was contagious. I propped my chin on my hand and smiled. "Want to?" Have a drink with me. When I dropped Charles off at his hotel, neither of us had drunk much. Just enough for the light buzz to soften the night, like moonlight spilled over the road. As I was about to say goodbye, Charles suddenly spoke, his voice low. Lauren, the first time we met, that night at the bar, it was because of him, wasn't it? He sat on the bench, looking up at me, his gaze direct, no longer dodging. His pale skin was tinged with a faint blush from the wine, and his eyes sparkled like a starry sky, making me pause. Since I met Charles, he had always been cold, aloof, carrying the demeanor of someone raised in a strictly disciplined family. But sometimes, when he looked at me, there was a flicker of youth, naive and sincere. Maybe the night was too beautiful, the moon too quiet, the wine too smooth. Everything whispered that this was the perfect moment to let things out. I stepped closer and reached out. Charles didn't flinch. I smiled gently. My marriage is a disaster. I've always known he had mistresses. As long as he didn't flaunt them in front of me, I let it go. People laughed at me, said I was stupid, that while he was out enjoying himself, I still clung to this wedding ring. I paused, glancing at the glittering band on my ring finger. The day I met you at the bar, news had just broken that he was on vacation with another woman. It was his birthday. I had foolishly thought I'd wait for him to come home so we could celebrate together. I didn't know someone else was already throwing him a party. My voice softened. That night I was devastated. I got drunk and thought, why can't I do the same? Why am I the only one holding on? I looked at Charles, my gaze hazy, as if the wine and moonlight had woven together, pulling me into a rare moment of truth. Then I saw you. I touched his cheek, and Charles froze, his voice rough. Lauren. You're special, I whispered. You're not like anyone I've ever met. You carry a kind of distance, a loneliness, sometimes close, sometimes far. I've heard so many people say they feel lonely, but your loneliness is real. It's like in your inner world, there's only ever been you. You're always hiding something. I lowered my head, our eyes meeting, our breaths so close they blended. Charles's face shifted from a faint pink to a deep red, like a pressure cooker ready to blow. My voice caught. Could you stay with me a little while? Or, I leaned in and whispered in his ear, give me a chance to collaborate. Charles froze, his eyes wavering, like he was caught between reason and emotion. I took 2 steps back and almost laughed right in Charles's face. His expression was truly something, like a stormy sky, so dark it looked like it might spill over. Lauren! He gritted through his teeth, voice full of frustration, but there was also a hint of helplessness. I smiled, teasing. Cut back on the melodramas, Scion. I waved and walked toward the door. Go to sleep early. I'll pick you up for school in the morning. Charles didn't say anything, just stood there clenching his jaw, eyes following me like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I reached for the doorknob, but right then, a faint scent of alcohol surrounded me. Charles had closed in from behind, his tall frame pressing forward with the intensity of a young man, powerful and full of resolve. Before I could react, one slender hand slipped around my waist and landed on the door lock, holding me still. Maybe I had pushed too far. A tingle ran up the back of my neck as his teeth gently grazed it. Not hard, but enough to leave a burning mark, like a frustrated bite. Lauren? Charles whispered, his voice hoarse, a blend of anger and indulgence. His other hand tightened at my waist, pulling me into his warmth. You win, he muttered next to my ear, grumbling but firm. You can have me, or the chance to collaborate, whatever you want. Just one condition, he paused, breath hot against my ear. Tomorrow, dump that sorry excuse of a husband. His words cut like a blade, sharp but alluring, and I froze. I lay in the hotel bed, my head spinning from the heat of his body, and the pale moonlight pouring in through the window. My fingers curled, searching for something to anchor myself, but Charles noticed immediately, laced his fingers with mine, locking me in as if he had no intention of letting go. The sudden ring of my phone tore through the stillness of the night. I jerked my hand away and reached for it. The screen flashed. Thomas. The name snapped me back to reality. He was calling now, maybe because he finally remembered today was my birthday. But I hadn't gone home. I was about to toss the phone aside when Charles beat me to it, answering before I could stop him. Thomas's voice came through, suspicious. "Lauren? Why aren't you home yet?" "Home?" I laughed bitterly inside. What home did I even have to go back to? I started, but Charles, that bastard, decided to mess around. He nipped the back of my neck, not painful, just enough to make me involuntarily let out a small sound. Thomas, sensitive as ever, immediately screamed, "Lauren! What the hell are you doing?" I didn't get the chance to reply. Charles hung up, cutting off Thomas's yelling like slamming a door shut. I looked up at him, straight into his eyes. He leaned down, his gaze glowing, but I clapped my hand over his mouth. With a condition like that, I thought. I squinted, smiling mischievously. "This is such a cliché. Can't believe you're that type of guy." He bit my palm lightly, not painful, just enough to make me jump. Then Charles broke free, leaned down, and bit into my shoulder, voice dropping low and dangerous. "Lauren, I'm still a man." The next morning, I woke up in the hotel room, bathed in soft sunlight. Charles was still asleep, clinging to me like an octopus, his breath steady against my shoulder. I gently peeled his arms off and slipped out of bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor. My phone buzzed on the table, over 40 missed calls, all from Thomas. I smirked, didn't bother checking them, just picked up the phone and stepped out onto the balcony, leaving Charles behind in peaceful sleep. On the way back, I drove past a shopping center, my eyes catching on the bright advertisements. I thought for a second, pulled over, and walked into a gift shop. By the time I got home, it was nearly noon. I opened the door, the living room heavy, quiet. Thomas was slumped sideways on the couch, hair messy, shirt wrinkled, like he hadn't slept all night. On the coffee table sat a cake, the white frosting slightly melted, a few strawberries rolling off to the side. I walked over, gently brushing his disheveled hair. Thomas opened his bloodshot eyes and said stiffly, "Lauren, where were you last night?" "Who were you with?" His gaze fell to my hand, then suddenly gripped my wrist. "Where's your ring?" "Lauren, where's your wedding ring?" I pulled my hand back, smiling faintly. "Someone else took it off." The words were soft, but sliced like a knife, leaving Thomas frozen. I reached into my bag and pulled out a white ceramic mug, the words, "World's Best Husband," printed in bold red. I set it on the table, stepped back, tilted my head, and admired it. "It suits you," I said. Thomas looked like he was about to explode. He grabbed the mug and hurled it to the floor. The sound of ceramic shattering rang out sharp and final, like the end of whatever was left between us. He stared at me, his eyes heavy, voice low and strained. "Who is it?" I shrugged, mocking. "You gonna go cause him trouble?" Thomas didn't answer, just repeated, "Who?" I laughed out loud, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Charles." The name dropped like a stone into still water. Thomas froze, his eyes flickering between disbelief and shock. "Lauren, you're lying, right?" Was it because he couldn't believe Charles Hay would look at a married woman like me? Or because he couldn't believe I would betray this marriage? I said nothing, just pulled a folder from my bag and tossed it onto the table. "Divorce papers," I said, voice cold but firm. They had been drafted long ago. I had been waiting a long time. Bianca had been useless, so I did it myself. I sat down across from him, eyes locked. "Go ahead and look. The division is very clear. What's yours stays yours, what's mine stays mine. I'm not taking anything from you. I hope you'll sign today. The sooner the better. Thomas didn't move, just stared at me, his voice lowering. Lauren, we don't have to get divorced. If it's about Bianca, I can... I cut him off, face expressionless. Thomas, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm informing you he tried to say something, but I kept going, voice sharp. We can adjust the contract if needed, but the divorce is non-negotiable. Lauren, I won't... Thomas started to push back, but I leaned in and calmly said each word. Falsify financial statements. His face went pale instantly, like he'd been doused in cold water. I smiled, my voice light but full of threat. Thomas, you wouldn't want the media to find out about that, would you? He stayed silent, eyes flickering, hands gripping the edge of the table, like he was battling with himself. When Thomas left, he took the divorce papers with him, his face dark and heavy. I stood quietly in the living room, my eyes scanning the half-melted birthday cake on the table, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. When I had some free time, I scrolled through my phone, and the screen lit up with a string of messages from Thomas. Where are you? Busy? Something urgent? Why'd you leave so early? Why didn't you call me when you left? I wanted to have breakfast with you. I smirked, snapped a photo of the shattered mug, lying all alone on the floor, and sent it with the caption, Went out early to deliver a gift. Thomas's company was sinking into a serious financial crisis. A senior executive, someone vaguely related to him, had embezzled a large sum of money. If the matter got exposed, the business empire he'd built would collapse like a sandcastle. Even though the company had deep roots and solid foundations, his preference for personal ties over competence had only worsened the cracks. He didn't dare hand the guy over, only tried to quietly patch the deficit behind the scenes, like a tightrope walker teetering over a deadly drop. I knew that if I pushed him into a corner, Thomas might drag me down with him, pride be damned. So while waiting for the court date, I stayed at the house, living my life as usual, going to work every day, as if nothing had changed. The only difference was, to spite me, Thomas brought Bianca home. They were glued to each other, her laugh echoing through what used to be our home, now nothing but a stage set. Sometimes my eyes lingered on Bianca's belly, just over a month in. No visible sign yet. She avoided my gaze, her eyes glimmering with unease. I knew she hadn't told Thomas about the baby yet, and maybe she never would. On the day of the divorce, the weather was clear, gentle sunlight streaming through the car window as I sat in Thomas's car on the way to court. During a 10-second red light, the air was so stifling you could hear your own heartbeat. Thomas suddenly spoke, no longer sharp or sarcastic, just tired. Lauren, if I'd never gone looking for someone else, would we have made it to the end together? I turned to look at him, into those bloodshot eyes. Truth is, Thomas and I had some really good days. Maybe 3 months or less, I don't remember. But ever since the first woman showed up, and then others kept coming, everything changed. The first time I caught him, the next morning, still hungover, he smiled gently and said, Lauren, I hope you won't say anything that'll ruin my mood. I swallowed the pain and replied, Don't drink too much. It's bad for your health. People only grow nostalgic when they're about to lose something, but that's not real regret. Even if he could go back, he'd still choose the same path. I didn't answer, just quietly looked out the window. When the judge's gavel finally came down, my heart truly felt light. As we stepped out of the courthouse, Thomas paused, voice hoarse. Lauren! I turned back and smiled. Sure, if you had never looked elsewhere, if it had only ever been the two of us, we'd have grown old together, maybe had a smart little girl who'd take over the company. We could have quit our jobs and traveled the world. At the end of our lives, when we're both old, we'd look into each other's eyes and promise to meet again in the next life. I stepped closer and adjusted his tie, like I used to in the early days of our marriage, my eyes curving softly. Thomas seemed shaken, whispering, Lauren. But I stepped back, dodging the hand he reached out toward me, my voice turning cold. But you wouldn't, Thomas. I know you too well. Fake, selfish, arrogant, unfaithful, irresponsible. His face darkened, his hands clenched into fists. I let out a faint laugh. Go ahead, enjoy it. Now that we're divorced, you can finally admit your ex-wife was cruel and cold-hearted. Thomas moved closer, brushing his fingers along a lock of hair by my cheek, his voice like ice. Lauren, someone like you will never get real love from anyone. A curse spoken in the gentlest tone, but I just shrugged. Who cares? Losing love means nothing when I've finally found freedom. A sharp car horn cut through the air. I turned to see Charles sitting in a sleek sports car, his expression irritated, eyes sharp and cold, fixed on Thomas. I waved at Thomas and said sincerely, "Goodbye." I got in the car. Charles leaned over to buckle my seatbelt, his movements careful but stiff, not even glancing at me once. I lowered my head and bit his cheek lightly. Charles jolted. "Just copying you," I teased. "Jealous?" he muttered bitterly. "You just divorced, and you're already fixing his damn tie." I kissed his cheek again. "Relax. I stopped loving him a long time ago." Charles looked up, a hopeful gleam in his eyes. I pulled out my phone and called Thomas's longtime rival. I had promised not to leak the falsified financial reports to the media, but if someone else exposed it, well, that's out of my hands. "I have something you'll want to know," I said calmly into the phone. Charles looked at me, the corners of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. "News about Thomas's company has broken. Negative rumors have spread everywhere, from cutting news articles to whispers at high society parties. Thomas is so busy he's almost bleeding at the temples, running around to put out fires. But no matter what he does, he absolutely refuses to admit any fault." I'm sitting in my office, scrolling through headlines on my phone, a slight curve forming on my lips. Everything is going exactly as planned. One afternoon, Assistant Kyle knocks on my office door, beaming. "Miss Lauren," she nearly exclaims, "their company has issued new shares." I raise an eyebrow, set my coffee cup down, and smile. Thomas's company has weathered the first storm of public uproar and is now holding an extraordinary shareholders meeting. I walk into the conference room, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting reflections on the glossy wooden floor and echoing the bustling crowd below. The room is bright, neat, and lavish, designed to uphold the appearance of an empire holding steady. I stand by the window, take in the scene for a moment, then exhale deeply. This world really is like a rolled-up egg pancake. Charles, wearing a cap and mask but still determined to come, shoots me a puzzled glance. After a beat of silence, he murmurs, "I'll buy one for you later." Footsteps thunder down the hallway, fast, familiar. Just like years ago, before I married Thomas, whenever I came to his company, he'd always come quickly. The secretary's voice drifts from outside the door. "Thomas, the person seated in the chair leading the meeting is the largest shareholder, and this time he's acquired—" Her words cut off as the door opens. The wheel of his swivel chair clicks softly as it turns. I turn around, planting my hands on the conference table, casually looking at Thomas and smiling. "Long time no see, Thomas." Didn't expect we'd meet again so soon. Thomas's face cracks like ice. His eyes darken, his lips press tight, as if holding back a storm. When he shakes my hand, he grips so hard I can feel each fingertip tense, as though he wants to crush my hand. I don't back down. My freshly done nails scratch into his palm, a hidden blow concealed behind a polite smile. The meeting is tense. I tear into every flaw in Thomas's reports, from misaligned figures to bad decisions. Every question I ask is a blade, sharp and precise, leaving Thomas struggling to maintain his calm. The more furious he becomes, the more satisfied I feel, as if I'm playing a chess game I know I'll win. When the meeting ends, shareholders file out, and a few try to approach me, but Thomas steps forward, tall as a wall, blocking them. He lowers his eyes, pupils dark, voice gritted. Lauren, you really are despicable. I casually brush imaginary dust off his suit shoulder, teasing, Thomas, you're wrong. This is business. How can that be called shameless? I tilt my head, my gaze cold. If you can't even hold on to your own company, don't blame others. Thomas stands motionless, his fists clenched, as though he wants to say something but can't find the words. Business is ruthless, like a forest full of wolves, and I, a merchant, have learned to bite back before getting bitten. Leaving his company, I walk out the main gate and unexpectedly lock eyes with a familiar figure. Bianca Lane is standing there, looking haggard. Yet she's still beautiful, fragile as glass, like the slightest touch would shatter her. Please, I just want to see Thomas, she pleads, voice trembling, hands clutching the edge of her skirt. I won't take much time. Please. But the guard blocks her coldly, like an unfeeling wall. The automatic door slides open abruptly, and Thomas steps out, face stormy, eyes icy. Bianca jolts, then rushes toward him, voice breaking. Tom! Why won't you see me? The guard tries to stop her. Miss, you can't do this. Thomas stands still, his gaze skimming over Bianca's tear-streaked face without emotion. Next time, don't show up here again. Bianca bites her lip, desperation flickering in her voice. Tom, please, I'm pregnant with your child. Thomas's expression doesn't change, his voice cold like night air. If you want to be a single mother, fine. Bianca's strength seems to drain away. Her arms drop, her eyes stare blankly as Thomas gets into his car and disappears behind the glass door. She stands there silently, like a broken statue under the sunset. I watch the tragic scene until the last moment, then raise the car window and say softly but resolutely, Let's go. The car glides smoothly toward my company, streetlights flickering on like wayward stars. I reach to unbuckle my seatbelt, but a warm hand holds firm. Charles leans in, eyes deep, lips softly brushing mine. Tender, but not giving me an escape. His breath mingles with mine, faintly smelling of grass. His hand tightens around mine, and a cool ring, warmed slightly by his skin, slips onto my ring finger. It settles there, sure as a declaration that I no longer belong to any swamp. I look at the ring, silver glowing under the lamplight. Not the old ring, but a new beginning. Charles says nothing, just watches me quietly, eyes bright like a cloudless night sky. I smile, not with a merchant's cunning, but with the relief of a woman finding herself again. The car stops at my company gate, but I don't rush out. I sit there, letting the sunset filter through the window, casting a gentle golden glow over my hand, soothing invisible scars. Fragments of memory about Thomas, years of stubbornly wearing that wedding ring, the long nights swamped in schemes and pain. All of that quietly dissolves like mist under the morning sun. I'm no longer the wife who endured quietly, nor the lone wolf in the business world. I am Lauren Steele, a woman who learned to let go, who chose freedom instead of chains. Charles holds my hand, fingers interlaced, reminding me that I never have to walk alone again. I lean back, close my eyes, letting the hum of the engine and Charles's steady breath carry me into a peaceful moment. No drama, no grand gestures, just an ordinary moment when I open my eyes and see that the world is still there, vast and full of promise. I walked out of that swamp, not by running away, but by facing it, step by step, until I found my own light.